Rain. A Brooklyn sidewalk at 5:40 in the morning. A 19-year-old kid crouches at the edge of a storm drain and picks up a black leather wallet that does not belong to him. He opens it under the awning of a closed flower shop. $14,000. He counts it twice. His hands are steady. His stomach is empty, has been empty since yesterday morning. 6 blocks behind him, under a bridge, his twin brother is coughing into his sleeve so quietly that nobody will hear it. Nobody has heard it in 6 nights. $14,000 buys a door that locks. He knows exactly what it buys. He stands there in the rain for a long time. Then his thumb finds something behind the driver's license. A slot most people would never check. A folded piece of notebook paper, worn soft at the crease, carried by someone for 2 years. He unfolds it, and everything changes. The rain started at 4:45 in the morning. Damon Carter knew this because he was already awake. He was always already awake. Sleep under the overpass at the south end of Brooklyn was less like sleeping and more like waiting for the night to finish with you. You closed your eyes. You lay still. You let your body do what it could with the hours. But some part of you stayed alert, the part that had learned, over 8 months, that the world did not hold still just because you needed it to. He lay on his back on the flattened cardboard, staring up at the concrete underside of the bridge, listening to the rain tick against the tarp above him. The tarp was one of the better things they had, found intact behind a construction site on Flatbush Avenue 6 months ago. Uzra had spotted it first, folded under a dumpster, untouched. They had carried it between them for 12 blocks without either of them commenting on how significant a dry tarp was. They had both known. Some things didn't need saying. Uzra was asleep 3 feet away, or something close to asleep. His chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm of a person who had learned to go somewhere else while his body stayed behind. He did that. Disappeared into himself when the world got too loud or too cold or too much. Damon had been watching his brother sleep since they were 3 years old. He knew every version of it. The twitchy sleep when Ezra was problem-solving, fingers moving slightly against the cardboard like he was typing in his dreams. The deep sleep when Ezra had gone somewhere unreachable. And this one, tonight. The shallow sleep that was not really sleep at all, but just the body doing its best version of rest. Ezra had been coughing. Not loud, never loud. He did it quietly, the way he did most things, pressed at his mouth into his sleeve, held it down, released it in small, controlled bursts when he thought Damon was asleep. Damon had heard every single one, 5 nights in a row, maybe 6. He had stopped counting, because counting made it a problem he had to solve, and right now it was a problem he had no tools to solve, and living with that required not counting. He did not bring it up, because bringing it up meant Ezra would say he was fine, and then they'd both have to perform believing that. And performing took energy. An energy, in the way of everything they needed most, was the one thing they could not afford to waste. At 5 o'clock, Damon sat up. He pulled on his sneakers, gray Nikes, hole near the left toe, found in a donation bin outside a church on Atlantic Avenue 4 months back. He laced them slowly, the way his mother had taught him. Take your time with the small things, she used to say. The big things will rush at you soon enough. He pulled on his jacket, checked the small zipper pocket out of habit. The notebook wasn't in there. That was Ezra's, always Ezra's. But his fingers checked anyway. A leftover from when they were children and Loretta used to slip folded dollar bills into their jacket pockets like small portable prayers. There were no dollar bills now. There was nothing in the pocket now. But his fingers checked. Uzra's hand appeared from beneath the flannel blanket. One brief thumbs up, then gone, not asleep. Never fully asleep. Damon almost said something, almost asked about the cough. Instead, he nodded at a person who couldn't see him nodding and walked out into the rain. The route to Bet's Corner was 6 blocks. Damon had walked it so many times his feet knew it without being told. Down under the overpass, up the concrete steps, across Tillery Street, past the parking garage that always smelled like motor oil and old cigarettes, past the bodega that kept its lights burning all night like a small, stubborn sun, and through the alley behind Magnolia Table, a French restaurant that charged $40 for a chicken dinner, and left its bread rolls in a bag near the dumpster on good mornings. This was not a good morning. The bag wasn't there. Damon kept walking, past the dry cleaner with the cracked front window, past the woman in the long coat, walking a small dog, wearing an actual knitted sweater. The dog looked at Damon with the calm authority of a creature that had never once considered the question of breakfast as anything other than a certainty. Damon did not make eye contact with the dog. He kept his head down, counted steps, thought about the dish order at Bennett's. Pots first, then sheet pans, then plates. Saved the mugs for last because the coffee residue needed soaking time. Pi had a system. When everything else was chaos, you built systems around the small things. Bet had shown him that, not in words but in the way she ran her kitchen, everything in its place, every movement with a purpose, nothing wasted. He was thinking about the pots. He was not thinking about anything important. And then he saw it, a wallet, black leather, sitting at the edge of the curb, half tucked against the metal grate of a storm drain, wet but not soaked, which meant it hadn't been there long. Damon stopped. He picked it up, heavy. Not the weight of its contents, the weight of something that mattered to someone. He stepped under the awning of a closed flower shop. Dark inside, lilies pressed against the glass, going gray at the edges. He opened the wallet and stopped breathing. Cash. A thick fold of $100 bills held together by a silver money clip. Clean. Pressed flat. Each bill against the next like they'd been laid down with intention. He counted them once, then counted them again. 140 bills, $14,000. 3 credit cards behind the cash, all black. The kind of black that wasn't a color but a statement. Embossed lettering. A name. Howard A. Aldrich. He had never heard that name before. A driver's license with the same name. A photograph of a man with silver hair, precise features, eyes that looked like they were used to being listened to. 60. Silver-haired. The kind of stillness in a photograph that belongs to a person who does not need to perform anything for anyone. Damon put the license back, and then, behind the license, on a small slot he almost didn't check, a folded piece of notebook paper, handwriting, young and quick, slanting to the right. He unfolded it. For the man who gave me everything. Oh, he read it twice. He stood there with $14,000 in his hands and a dead person hiding in front of him, because he knew immediately that whoever wrote this was gone. Not because the note said so, because of the way it was carried. Folded on the same crease too many times. Worn at the edges not from carelessness but from being touched. You only keep a note like that when the person who wrote it can't write you another one. He knew about that. He refolded the note carefully. Along the same crease, placed it back in the slot exactly as he'd found it. And then he stood under that awning and did the math. $14,000 looked like a door, not a metaphor. An actual door with a lock in an apartment where rain stayed outside and cold stayed outside. Nobody walked up to you at 3 in the morning and told you to move along. It looked like 6 months of rent in East Flatbush. First month, last month, security deposit. With enough left over that you weren't starting from zero the same day you moved in. It looked like a winter coat for Ezra. Hot their mother's old parka, the faded red one with the broken zipper that they still took turns wearing, Damon on odd nights, Ezra on even ones because it was the warmest thing they owned and it still smelled faintly of cocoa butter and laundry detergent and something underneath that neither of them had a word for, but both recognized immediately. A new coat with a zipper that worked. It looked like grocery, a phone plan, bus passes, maybe a semester at community college, both of them, together. Everything they needed right here, in 2 hands. He stood there for a long time. The rain tapped the awning. The lilies went grayer against the glass. And then, without the moment feeling like a decision, though it was one, though it was perhaps the most significant one he would ever make, he closed the wallet, tucked it inside his jacket against his chest, and turned around. He walked back to the bridge. He did not go to Bet's that morning. There were 2 things Damon did not tell Ezra right away when he got back. The first was the note. The second was the drugstore. He had passed a Walgreens on his way back to the bridge. Open. Always open. The lights inside the particular aggressive brightness that make them look clinical and slightly accusatory. And there, visible through the window, was an entire shelf of cough medicine. He stopped in front of it. Because Ezra had been coughing for 6 nights. And the good cough syrup, the kind that actually worked, not the off-brand chalk tablets from the dollar store, was right there, 40 feet away. And he had $14,000 inside his jacket. He stood in front of that drugstore for 4 minutes. He counted. Because his counting was the system. And then he thought it through, really thought it. If he bought the cough medicine, that was one thing. But if he bought it, He'd buy the good kind. And if he bought the good kind, he'd start thinking about what else Ezra needed. And if he started that list, it didn't stop. It never stopped. Food, clothes, the heel on Ezra's left shoe coming loose again, a phone with more than 11% battery. The list didn't have a bottom, and before long he'd be in a Walgreens spending money that belonged to someone else, telling himself each thing was the last thing, until the wallet was empty and the rationalizing was done, and all that was left was the fact of what he'd done. He walked away, and he carried that, quietly, the way he carried everything he couldn't fix yet. When he got back to the bridge, Ezra was awake, sitting cross-legged on the cardboard, notebook open in his lap, pen moving. He was always either coding or writing, and from a distance you couldn't tell the difference. The same expression, the same stillness, the same quality of attention that made whatever he was doing feel important even when you couldn't see what it was. Damon sat down across from him, put the wallet on the cardboard between them, said nothing. Ezra looked up, looked at the wallet, looked at Damon, back at the wallet. He didn't reach for it. Where? He said. Sidewalk, near the alley by Magnolia Table. Ezra picked it up, opened it carefully, the way he handled anything that might be significant, and went through it without a word. The cash, the cards, the license. He read the name, studied the photograph the way he studied things, completely, without performance, as if there were no audience, and he was simply trying to understand. Then he reached behind the license. His fingers found the small slot. Went still. He looked at Damon. Damon didn't say anything. Ezra pulled out the folded note, opened it slowly. Read it. And the silence between them became a different kind of silence. Fuller. The silence of two people who understand the same thing simultaneously and don't need words to make it real. Ezra folded the note back along the exact same crease, placed it back where it had been. There was a note inside, wasn't there? He said. Not a question. He'd already read it. Yeah, Damon said. Ezra closed the wallet, held it in both hands, the same way Damon had. The math was already running. Damon could see it. Ezra always did the math, not because he was cold, but because he was precise. He did the math so he could set it aside, so they could talk about what actually mattered. $14,000 divided by 2 was $7,000 each. $7,000 was a deposit and first month's rent. $7,000 was enough food for 4 months. $7,000 was enough to stop being invisible. And still, Ezra held the wallet and didn't move toward any of it. The silence lasted long enough for the rain to shift direction, long enough for a truck to pass on the overpass above them, the whole underside of the bridge humming with the vibration of it. Then Ezra looked up, and what came was not what Damon expected. Not a question, not a debate, just a statement, said the way Ezra said things he had already finished thinking about. You already know what we're doing. Yeah, Damon said. So why are we still sitting here, giving ourselves a minute? Ezra was quiet for a second. Fair. 2 more minutes. The rain, the hum of traffic, the sound of a train somewhere underground, that low groan of metal on metal that you felt in your back teeth. Then Ezra closed the notebook, slid it into the plastic bag he used to keep it dry, stood up, pulled on his shoes, picked up the wallet. Let's go fund him. Before you understand anything else about this story, you need to understand Loretta Carter. She was 5'4". She wore her hair natural, a crown of tight coitzels she maintained with the same disciplined care she gave to everything that mattered. She had a voice that didn't raise itself when it wanted to be heard. It got quieter, slower, more deliberate, the way a river gets more dangerous when it narrows. She worked nights. She worked doubles. She worked the kind of work that leaves no evidence of itself except in the body, in the shoulders, in the lungs. On the way, a 41-year-old woman looks like she is carrying something heavy, even when her hands are empty. She cleaned office buildings in Lower Manhattan for 14 years. Night shifts. The industrial chemicals they used came with warnings on the label. Warnings that assumed you had a mask, adequate ventilation, a union that cared whether you breathed. Loretta had none of those things. She had a mop, a cart, a key card that got her into 32 floors of glass and marble between 11 at night and 6 in the morning. She cleaned floors that corporate executives walked across without looking down. She did it without complaint. Because at home were her boys, which was reason enough for anything, for 14 years. And then the doctor said stage 4. And then the doctor said environmental. And then the doctor said things that Loretta listened to with her hands folded in her lap, and her face giving nothing away. She told Damon first, then Ezra. Sitting them both down at the kitchen table, the one that had survived 3 apartments and 2 boroughs and 1 life that kept asking more of her than she had. She didn't cry. She told them what the doctors said, what the options were, what she needed them to know. Then she said, "We handle what's in front of us. We don't borrow trouble from what's next." That was Loretta. Her father, a man named Curtis Delaney, had walked out when the boys were 3 years old. Left one evening without explaining himself and didn't come back. No phone call, no letter. Just a chair at the kitchen table that stayed empty until Loretta replaced it with a bookshelf. She never spoke badly of him in front of the boys. She never spoke of him at all if she could manage it. She turned the absence into a shelf and put books on it and moved forward. The night she died, Damon and Ezra were outside the room, not by choice. The oncology ward at Kings County Hospital was full. She'd been in the hallway for 2 days, curtained off from the corridor. Not a room and not privacy, but something in between that the hospital offered, because it had nothing better. Visiting hours ended. The rules were the rules. There was a nurse at the desk, not unkind, exhausted in the way of someone working the 4th overnight in a row, who told them they had to go. They sat at the end of the hall on the floor. Didn't talk much. At 2:17 in the morning, the nurse came and found them. Damon said thank you. He did not know why. It was not the appropriate response to what she'd just told him, but it was what came out. Ezra didn't say anything. He sat on the floor for a moment longer. Then he stood, straightened his jacket. The way you find the shape of yourself again when the shape keeps threatening to come apart. "Come on," Damon said. "Where?" Damon had no answer. That was the first time in his life there was no answer to that question. Left the hospital. They walked. They sat on a bench in a park until the sky began to lighten. That was the first night. Then the city tried in the way cities try when they have too many people and not enough of everything. A social worker, a list of shelters, a housing application. Wait list position 412. Estimated time 14 months. A follow-up call scheduled for 6 weeks later. The follow-up call was never made. Every shelter door was the same door. Full. "We're sorry, try this number." This number also does not answer, so they built a system instead. 2 sleeping areas under the overpass. Cardboard layered and lined with newspaper. A tarp angled to catch the runoff from the bridge structure before it hit the ground. Water bottles along the far wall. A small wooden shelf. Plywood balanced on 2 cinder blocks that held exactly 2 things. A Ziploc bag of important documents that could not be replaced. And a framed photograph of Loretta Carter in a red coat, standing outside somewhere cold, laughing at something off to the left of the frame. She was always laughing at something you couldn't see. That was very much Loretta. Ezra Carter had discovered coding the way certain people discover a language they were always meant to speak. 3 years ago, 16 years old, a computer lab at their high school, a class called Introduction to Programming, that Ezra had taken because it fit the schedule. The teacher wrote a single line of Python on the board on the first day. Ezra looked at it, and something happened that didn't announce itself. Something quiet and internal and permanent. He went home and coded for 4 hours, came back the next day and did 6. Within 2 months he had taught himself Python, then JavaScript, then HTML and CSS, then enough React to build things that actually function. I built them in the corner of their apartment, on a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen, between doing homework and helping with dinner and sitting with their mother on the nights that were hard. When the laptop died, and laptops always die eventually, usually at the worst possible time, he moved to the library. Brooklyn Public Library on Flatbush Avenue. Same computer every day, second row, right side. The one with the mouse that required a specific angle to work, a 15-degree tilt to the left and a light touch on the right button. He learned its angles. He learned everything it took to make the thing work, and then he used it. He built 2 applications that lived on a free hosting platform. The first was a map, updated daily, showing every location in Brooklyn, distributing free meals to anyone who showed up. Which shelter, which church, which community center, what time, what to bring. Color-coded by distance. He'd built it because he and Damon needed it. He made it public because other people did too. The second was a budgeting tool for people living below the federal poverty line. Not the kind that told you to stop buying coffee. The kind that understood you were starting from nothing. That asked, what do you have, what do you owe, What keeps you alive this week, and what is the one next thing you could do to make next week slightly less hard? Clean interface, accessible on any phone with a browser, no account required. Data stored. He built that one because he and Damon needed it. He made that one public, too. A few dozen people used it. The comments were kind in the way of comments left by people who don't know how to say that something moved them. He kept improving both applications anyway. Not for the audience, which was small. Because building was the only place where everything else dropped away, and there was just the problem in front of him, and the work of solving it. Nathaniel Cross had noticed him in the second week. Nathaniel was 51, had been a reference librarian at the Brooklyn Public Library for 22 years, and had developed over that time a particular quality of watchfulness. Not surveillance, attention. The ability to observe without interrupting, to see what a person was doing before deciding whether or how to respond to it. He watched Ezra for 2 months. Not intrusively, from across the room in the way of a person who tends a space and pays attention to the people in it. Ezra arrived at 9 when the doors opened, went directly to the same computer, sat down, did not browse, did not wander, did not pause, just worked, with the focus of someone who understood that the hours were finite and every one of them mattered. In the 3rd month, Nathaniel began leaving books on the table before Ezra arrived. No note, no explanation. Just a book on React architecture one morning, a guide to accessible UX design the next. Once, a biography of a programmer who had built something significant from nothing. Ezra used all of them. He never thanked Nathaniel directly. He was not a person who thanked directly when there was another way. But one morning he'd left a printed copy of his map application on the computer. When he departed, 17 pages of code, with handwritten annotations in the margins, left where Nathaniel would find it. Nathaniel had read all 17 pages. He hadn't understood all of it, but he understood enough to recognize what he was looking at. What he did next, he did quietly, without asking permission. He photographed the screen of Ezra's application, wrote a brief description, posted it to a professional forum where software engineers discussed their work, debated architecture, left public commentary on things that caught their attention. Built by a 19-year-old on public library computers, he wrote. No formal training, no tutorials. Documentation and determination. He posted it on a Tuesday night. By Thursday morning, it had over 1,000 upvotes. By Thursday afternoon, a senior engineer at a well-known software company had left a comment pinned at the top by the moderators. This UX shows more empathy than most funded startups I've reviewed. The data architecture is clean. The accessibility considerations are things professional teams routinely overlook. Whoever built this is either very experienced or learns at a speed I've rarely seen. A person looking for work? Sincerely asking. 48 replies beneath it, all variations of the same response. Nathaniel read the thread, closed his browser, said nothing to Ezra. Not yet. Some things needed time to arrive at the right moment. He had watched enough people, read enough books in this library, to understand that timing was its own kind of wisdom. Ezra Carter, sitting at the computer with the wobbly mouse in the second row on the right side, knew none of this. He knew his battery was at 11%. He knew the library closed at 8. He knew his brother had left at 5 in the morning and would be back 9 with whatever Bet had going for the trash run. He knew that Damon hadn't mentioned the cough. He knew Damon had heard everyone. Those were the things Ezra Carter knew on the morning that everything changed. They walked out from under the bridge at 7 in the morning. The rain had softened to the kind that doesn't announce itself. Not drops anymore. Just a cold, damp presence. A settling of the air around you that made everything slightly heavier than it should have been. They walked side by side without talking. They didn't need to. They had been walking alongside each other since before they had words for anything. Since before language was a thing they used, they had used proximity instead, and 18 years later they still did. Damon had the wallet in his inside jacket pocket. He could feel it. Against his sternum, the weight of it that had nothing to do with weight. $14,000. Belonging to a man they had never met, whose child had written him a note that he had been carrying ever since. Ezra's hands were in his jacket pockets, his chin slightly down as his face in the particular stillness took on when he was whacking something through. Not worrying, thinking. There was a difference, and Damon had always known it. How do we find him? Ezra said. License had an address, Aldrich Capital on Lexington, 47th floor. I looked it up. While you were sleeping. A pause. While I was sleeping, Ezra repeated, the tone of someone who knows exactly what that means and has decided not to make a point of it. The 47th floor, Damon said. That's a long walk. Yeah. They kept walking, a few more steps. Damon. Yeah. We're doing the right thing. Not a question. Not a request for confirmation. A statement said aloud the way you say a thing when you want to hand it to someone else. When you want it held by more than one pair of hands so it's less likely to slip. Yeah, Damon said. We are. They walked the rest of the way in silence. Two 19-year-old young men. Walking through Brooklyn in November rain. Carrying $14,000 that did not belong to them. Heading toward a man they had never met. To give back something he did not yet know was on its way. No one stopped them. No one noticed them. No one on that sidewalk on that particular Tuesday morning would have looked at them and imagined they were doing anything other than what they appeared to be doing. Two young men walking, going somewhere, like everyone else. Except they were also doing something else. They were choosing. Without audience. Without the kind of witness that makes a choice feel safe. Without any guarantee that the man on the 47th floor would be someone worth choosing for. They were choosing to be exactly who their mother had raised them to be. Even when it cost. Even when they could feel the cost with every step. Even knowing that no one would ever know what it cost except them. The rain kept falling. Brooklyn moved around them the way it always did. Without pausing, without asking, without accommodating itself to any individual person's circumstances. And somewhere on the 47th floor of a glass tower on Lexington Avenue, a silver-haired man named Howard Aldrich stood at his office window with a cold cup of coffee, looking at a city he owned significant pieces of, carrying a grief that had been with him so long he had stopped noticing it was there. He didn't know what was coming toward him. He didn't know that the last thing Owen had ever given him, the wallet, the note, the leather worn soft at the corners, was on its way back, carried by two sets of hands that had nothing. And held anyway with everything they had. Bant Dung. Yoko la toida 5 sections Jamoy Part. Part 2 Viet có 6 sections, vi phạm quy tắc. Section 6 và Section 7, cùng bối cảnh căn hộ Columbia nên có thể gộp lại thành một section duy nhất. Dưới đây là Part 2 viết lại đúng cấu trúc. Tối đa file sections, tối thiểu 1,000 từ, không cắt bớt cảnh, không cắt bớt nội dung. The lobby of Aldrich Capital was designed to make you feel small. Not aggressively, not with signage or visible mechanism you could point to and name. I didn't need those things. It had white marble floors, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the chandelier above, and the waterfall feature along the back wall, and the people moving through in good shoes. It had a reception desk the size of a compact car behind, which sat men in dark suits whose job description included, among other things, knowing at a glance who was supposed to be there. It had lighting calibrated to illuminate certain things, and leave other things in a quality of selective shadow that was not darkness so much as a reminder of where the emphasis was intended to fall. It had been built to communicate a single message to anyone who walked through the revolving door. The message was, this space was made for someone. Whether that someone was you was a question the lobby left deliberately open. Hyman noticed all of this in the 3 seconds it took him and Ezra to walk through the revolving at 7:15 in the morning. He also noticed the guard's expression shift, not dramatically, not the cold assessment of a movie villain, just a recalibration. Small, automatic. The kind that happens when something enters a field of vision that doesn't match the established pattern. 2 young black men in wet clothing, one in a torn hoodie, one with a belt fashioned from nylon rope, walking into a midtown Manhattan corporate tower before 8 in the morning on a Tuesday. The guard, name tag, read Holland's broad shoulders, shaved head, the bearing of someone who had worn a uniform long enough that it had become skin, straightened slightly behind the desk, not threateningly, just present, on the way of a person who has already made a preliminary determination and is now waiting for information to confirm or revise it. Damon walked to the desk first, because that was how it worked between them, not because Ezra couldn't handle himself. Ezra could hold his own in any room, had proven that in every situation the last 8 months had produced, but because Damon had a particular quality that was useful in moments like this one. I could stand in front of a person who had already decided something about him and make them pause. Not through charm, not through performance, through a steadiness that was more disarming than either. "We're here to see Mr. Aldrich," Damon said. "Howard Aldrich, do you have an appointment?" "No, then I can't." That was when Ezra stepped forward, placed the wallet on the desk between them, set it down quietly, without ceremony. "The way you set down evidence, when the evidence speaks more clearly than anything you could say about it." Hollins looked at it, looked at them, back at the wallet. "We found his wallet," Ezra said. Simple, direct, with no interest in being impressive about it, just the fact offered plainly to a person who needed it. Something shifted in the room, not visible, not something you could identify if someone asked you to point to it, but present. The way a temperature change is present, before you consciously register that the air is different. Hollins picked up the phone. They waited. 4 minutes, Damon counted. The lobby moved around them the way lobbies in buildings like this always moved, with purpose and direction, with the specific momentum of people who knew exactly where they were going and had never seriously considered whether they belonged there. A woman in a gray blazer came off an elevator, crossed the lobby, and walked past Ezra without looking at him. She navigated around the space he occupied, the way you navigate around a piece of furniture someone has left in an inconvenient location. Not with hostility, with the specific indifference of someone who has processed that he is there and concluded that this does not require any further response. Ezra watched her go. His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened by a degree Damon recognized. The specific small tightening of someone who has received something and decided in real time not to give it the satisfaction of a visible reaction, not denial. A choice. The same choice Lorette had modeled for them their whole lives, without ever naming it out loud. You do not hand your piece to people who don't know they're taking it. You hold it. You keep it for the things that deserve it. Something tightened in Damon's chest too. Not anger exactly. Recognition. The weight of being unseen in a room full of people. Of being processed as a variable to be managed, rather than a person to be acknowledged. They were both used to it. Had been used to it long before the bridge, in school hallways and grocery stores and every space that had its own unwritten requirements for belonging. Being used to something did not make it stop landing. It landed every time. It just registered differently now. Quieter. More controlled. Still there. The elevator at the far end of the lobby opened. A woman stepped out. 50s. Auburn hair cut short and precise. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She moved with the purposefulness of someone who had been solving other people's problems for a very long time, and had stopped finding the work remarkable because it had simply become the shafadap of her days. She walked directly to them. A performance of searching and then finding. She had known where they were from the moment the elevator doors opened. "I'm Vera," she said, shook Damon's hand, Ezra's. Equal. The handshake of someone who is simply being professional, which is its own form of respect. "You found Mr. Aldrich's wallet?" Damon handed it to her. She opened it efficiently. Not counting, checking, the cash, the cards, the license. Her fingers moved through each section, with the fluency of someone who had seen this wallet 1,000 times. At meetings, at lunch, at the coffee cart on the corner of 47th Street where Howard Aldrich still paid in cash because old habits don't update themselves just because the world has moved on. Then her thumb found the small slot behind the license, stopped, felt the edge of the folded paper. Something in her face went very still, not cold, the opposite of cold. The stillness that happens when something matters more than you had braced yourself for. She looked up at Damon. He met her eyes without looking away. She didn't ask any more questions. "Come with me," she said. Pressed the elevator button. Held the door, 62 floors. Damon watched the numbers climb on the display. He had never been in an elevator this fast. Felt less like going up and more like the ground falling away beneath you. The city receding, the street-level world becoming something else, something smaller and more distant with every floor that passed. Ezra stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back, the posture he defaulted to when he was nervous and had decided not to show it. A holdover from childhood, from school assemblies and doctors' offices and every situation that required holding very still and hoping the moment would be over before it demanded more than you had. Damon moved his arm so their shoulders were almost touching. Not quite, almost, which was and had always been enough. The doors opened onto the top floor. Thick carpet, soft lighting. The faint smell of fresh coffee and the quality of quiet that comes not from absence of sound but from very good insulation. The city outside made irrelevant by architecture and money. Farah walked them to the corner office at the end of the hall. Knocked once, opened the door. Howard Aldrich was on the phone, standing behind his desk, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. The office was large without being performative about it. A wall of windows behind him showed all of Manhattan spread out in the flat gray light of a November morning. Not the street-level version, compressed between buildings, looking up at what you couldn't reach. The elevated version, rooftops and cranes and bridges, and the silver thread of the East River catching what little early light there was. Everything visible, everything at once. He looked up when the door opened, saw Vera, saw the two young men behind her, then saw the wallet in her hand. He put the phone down without saying goodbye. Vera set the wallet on the desk. These two gentlemen found it in Brooklyn this morning and brought it here. Cash, cards, everything still inside. Howard did not reach for it immediately. Then he picked it up slowly, the way you pick up something you had quietly given up on seeing again. He opened it. His thumb went first to the fold of bills, still there, still held by the silver clip, undisturbed. Then the cards, then the license. And then his hand moved to the small slot behind the license, and his fingers found what they were looking for. Unfolded the note, read it, refolded it along the same crease it had lived on 2 years, slid it back.
10 seconds.
In those 10 seconds, Howard Aldrich's face did something Damon watched without being able to name precisely. A series of small internal movements. A man receiving something he had feared was permanently gone. Not the money, not the cards, the note. The folded piece of notebook paper with Owen's handwriting on it, still in its slot, still saying the same thing it had always said. Howard looked at Damon, really looked. Not the way Hollins had looked at them downstairs, not the rapid assessment, the categorizing, the filing away. This was slower, the look of someone revising their understanding of a moment in real time. Sit down, he said, quieter than Vera had expected. She had worked for this man for 15 years. And knew his voices the way you know the rooms of a house you've lived in long enough that you no longer need to turn on lights. The boardroom voice, the negotiating voice, the voice he used with people he had not yet decided about. This was none of those. This was simply him, without the surface that usually sat between himself and whatever he was actually feeling they sat. Damon on the left, Ezra on the right, Howard across from them. I set the wallet on the desk between all three of them, like it was an artifact belonging to the conversation as much as to any one person. $14,000, he said. You counted it? Yes, sir. And the cards? You saw the way they were? Yes, sir. You could have used them. The cash alone, you could have walked with it. No one would have found you. No one would have known. Damon didn't blink. We would have known. Howard looked at him for a long time. Then, at Ezra. The silence stretched and did its work. Vera stood near the door and kept very still. Keep it, Howard asked. The question sat between them. Ezra looked at his brother. Damon looked at the wallet on the desk between them. Because it's not ours, Damon said. Simple, final, the way certain things are true without requiring defense. His mother's voice in the construction of the sentence, her absolute unargued certainty in the sound of it. Howard opened his desk drawer, pulled out an envelope, slid it across the desk. There's $1,000 in there. A thank you. Please take. Damon looked at the envelope, then at Ezra, then back at Howard. Thank you, sir. I'm not offering charity. I know what it is, Damon said, respectful, clear, not sharp. We didn't come here for a reward. The room held that for a moment. And then something happened to Howard Aldrich's face. Not collapse, not dramatics. Something smaller and more significant than either. A hairline shift in something that had been held in one position for a long time. Like a locked door responding when someone finally touches the right place. Not turning the handle, just the recognition that it's there. Where do you live, he asked. He was looking at Damon. Damon looked at Ezra, half a second of the communication that required nothing spoken between them. Ezra answered, under a bridge in Brooklyn. Howard's hand, resting on the desk beside the wallet, closed slowly into a fist, not in anger. The way of someone who has received something physical and is trying to hold it steady. Vera recognized that fist, had seen it once before. In a hospital waiting room 2 years ago when a doctor came in and said 3 sentences that permanently rearranged the shape of Howard Aldrich's life. Howard said, without looking away from Damon and Ezra. Yes, clear my afternoon. Already done, she said. She stepped out, closed the door behind her, stood in the hallway for a moment that she could not have explained to anyone, but that felt necessary, because she had watched this man carry loss the way certain people carry a serious injury, compensating so completely that the compensation becomes invisible until you know to look for it. She had kept Owen's photograph on her desk because she believed someone should be looking at it. She had watched Howard walk past it every single morning. Stop, stand there for a moment without speaking, then adjust his tie and go into his office and close the door. She had watched him keep moving for 2 years, because moving was the only alternative he'd allowed himself. And now 2 young men from Brooklyn had walked through the lobby and placed a wallet on a desk, and she had felt the folded paper still in its slot, and she knew, without needing to be told, the way you know things after 15 years of paying close attention to one person, that something had shifted. She walked down the hall. She had an afternoon to clear. Howard Aldrich did not tell Damon and Ezra what he was doing next. He shook their hands, thanked them again, asked Vera to arrange a car to take them wherever they needed to go. They asked to be dropped at the Brooklyn Public Library on Flatbush Avenue. The driver said later that they didn't speak the entire ride. That afternoon, Howard made one phone call. Ray Tilden, private investigator, discreet, methodical. The young professional who moved through other people's lives gathering information without leaving evidence of his passage, and who had the good judgment never to offer opinions about what he found. 2 names, Howard said. Damon Carter, Ezra Carter. Twins, 19 years old, homeless in Brooklyn. I want everything. The file came back on Thursday afternoon. 11 pages. Single-spaced, the kind of document that reads like a case study in how every system designed to protect young people can fail them. Not through cruelty, but through the accumulated small weight of missed calls and full shelters, and lists that nobody followed up on. Howard read it alone in his office. Vera had gone home. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The building had the specific nighttime silence of a space designed for 100 people, currently holding one. Loretta Carter died 8 months prior. Stage 4 lung cancer, diagnosed late because she had no regular physicians and had delayed seeking care because she could not afford to miss shifts at the office buildings she cleaned at night. Treated at Kings County Hospital under emergency Medicaid. Died in a hallway because the oncology ward had no available beds, no life insurance, no savings, no next of kin listed other than her 2 sons. Father, Darnell Carter, had left the family when the boys were 3. Last known address, a rooming house in Baltimore, 2009. No contact maintained. No support of any kind. A man who had vanished the way smoke vanishes, completely and without explanation, after Loretta's death. Both sons referred to the city's housing assistance program. Application submitted. Waitlist position 412. Estimated placement time 14 months. In the interim, a list of emergency shelters provided. Every shelter at capacity. A follow-up call scheduled for 6 weeks after the initial referral. A raised note in the margin, in his own handwriting. Follow-up call was never made. Howard set down his reading glasses. He had built housing developments across 14 states. He sat on advisory boards of urban planning organizations. He had written substantial checks to foundations that distributed them programs he had never personally visited. He had given speeches at galas about closing the gaps in systems that designed to catch people before they fell. He had used the phrase affordable housing in hundreds of professional contexts over 30 years, and in the city where he lived, 4 miles south of where he was sitting. 2 19-year-old young men were sleeping on cardboard under a bridge because a follow-up call had never been made. He sat with that for longer than felt comfortable. Then he turned to page 8. Page 8 was about Ezra. Ray had attached a screenshot from a professional software engineering forum, posted by a Nathaniel Cross, reference librarian at the Brooklyn Public Library on Flatbush Avenue. The post described 2 web applications built on public library computers by a 19-year-old with no formal training in software development, a meal distribution map for Brooklyn, updated daily, and a personal finance tool designed specifically for users living below the federal poverty line. Both live, both free, both built from documentation and repetition, and the particular focused desperation of someone who needed them to exist. The screenshot showed the thread beneath the post. 1,247 upvotes. At the top, pinned by moderators, a comment from a senior engineer at a company Howard recognized. This UX reflects a level of empathy that most funded startups never develop. Because it can't be taught in a conference room, it has to be lived. The data architecture is clean. The accessibility decisions are things professional teams routinely overlook even when they know better. Whoever built this is either deeply experienced or learns at a rate I've rarely encountered. Possibly Basel. Is this person available? 44 replies beneath it, all variations on the same response. Ray's note at the bottom of the page. Subject is unaware this post exists. Librarian submitted independently without informing him. Howard read page 8 3 times. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, went down to the garage and got into his own car for the first time in months, backed out, and drove south through Midtown traffic, through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, into Brooklyn. Parked 3 blocks from the overpass on Tillery Street. Walked the rest of the way. He stopped on the sidewalk above the underpass and looked down through the chain-link fence at the place where 2 young men had made something that looked, from this distance, almost like a home. Cardboard, tarp, water bottles, a small plywood shelf on 2 cinder blocks. On the shelf, a framed photograph. He couldn't see it clearly from up here, but he could see it was a photograph kept on a shelf, rather than packed away, which told him something about the people who had put it there and what it meant to them. Howard stood above the overpass for a long time. The bridge hummed with traffic. The November air was cold and clear in the way of nights that have been washed by rain. Somewhere nearby someone was cooking, and the smell of it moved through the cold with a specificity that made the cold feel sharper by contrast. He walked back to his car, sat in it with the engine running and the heater on and both hands on the steering wheel, and cried. For the first time in 2 years, not for Owen, not for himself. Not for the particular shape his life had taken since the state trooper knocked on his door on a Sunday afternoon. For them. For 2 young men who had lost their mother in a hospital hallway and been handed a list of phone numbers that led nowhere, and built a life from cardboard and a found tarp, and kept a photograph of the woman they loved on a shelf made from construction scraps. I'd found $14,000 and walked it back. Because it wasn't theirs. He sat in the car for 20 minutes, then drove home and started thinking carefully about what to do next. Not quickly, not reactively. The way he thought about things that mattered, with patience, but the understanding that the timing of a thing was as important as the thing itself, and that getting the timing wrong was its own kind of failure. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. Damon was walking back from Bet's with a bag of corn muffins she had made too many of, which was deliberate, which they both understood and neither acknowledged, and a thermos of coffee she'd pressed into his hands, with a look that foreclosed argument. The number was Manhattan. Vera Hutchins, she said, assistant to Howard Aldrich. Mr. Aldrich would like to invite you and your brother to dinner this evening. His home. 7 o'clock. A car will come to wherever you prefer. Damon stopped walking. In the middle of the sidewalk, a woman with a stroller went around him without slowing. He nearly said no, was already building the polite version of no in his head, something that left the door open without committing to walking through it, something that bought time to decide whether walking through it was something they should actually do. Then he called Ezra, told him, 1 second for quiet. We should go, Ezra said, just like that, just like that. Damon looked at the muffins in the bag, the thermos, the ordinary gray Brooklyn afternoon around him. Okay, he said. The car was black, leather interior that smelled like something that had never been used. The driver said nothing the entire ride. He drove through the Battery Tunnel, up the FDR, onto Park Avenue, into the part of the city where the buildings grew taller and the sidewalks grew quieter in direct proportion to how expensive everything became. Pulled into an underground garage beneath a building so tall that Ezra leaned forward in his seat to see the top of it through the car window. How many floors? Ezra said. A lot, said Zod the driver. The first and only thing he said. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. Howard Aldrich was waiting. Not behind a desk, not in a suit. A navy sweater, dark pants, hands at his sides. He looked like a version of the man from The Office. Same silver hair, same precise features, but smaller somehow. Softer at the edges. as though the building and the title, a C62-floor elevation, had been part of what he projected from behind that desk. And standing here without them, he was simply a person. "Thank you for coming," he said, and meant it. You could hear the grain of it, the specific texture of a sentence that someone is actually saying rather than deploying. The table was set for 3 white plates, good silverware, cloth napkins, a roasted chicken in the center, still steaming beans, mashed potatoes, bread in a basket, simple food. The kind you make when you want people to feel at home rather than assessed. Damon sat and looked at the arrangement of utensils beside his plate. 3 forks, 2 knives, 2 spoons. He looked at Ezra. Ezra looked at the forks with the expression of someone presented with a puzzle whose solution key has not been included. 1 second. Both of them suspended at the specific intersection of social complexity and hunger that was, in its own absurd way, also genuinely funny. 2 young men who had slept on cardboard under a bridge 4 weeks ago were now sitting in front of a formal table setting in a penthouse on Park Avenue and did not know which fork was appropriate for chicken, which was, objectively, a lot. Howard noticed. He reached out, picked up the chicken drumstick, with his bare hand bit into it, set it back on his plate, wiped his fingers on a cloth napkin with the unhurried deliberateness of someone making a choice about what kind of dinner this was going to be. The silverware became optional. Damon exhaled. Ezra's mouth moved the fraction of a millimeter it moved when something struck him as genuinely funny, and he had decided not to fully commit to the expression. They ate. Howard asked about the library, about bets, about what they were studying. I asked questions, and then listened to the answers with the quality of attention that is different from the polite performance of listening. A kind where you ask a follow-up question about something specific from the previous answer. The kind that tells the person you actually heard them. After dinner, Howard set down his coffee cup. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "Please," Damon said. "I had someone look into your situation. I know about your mother. I know about the shelters. I know about the bridge." He looked at both of them before continuing. "I'm not telling you that to embarrass you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that what I'm about to offer isn't coming from pity. It's not charity with better packaging." He rested his elbows on the table. The posture of someone saying something they have thought about carefully for days and are now saying simply, without ornamentation. An apartment. 2 bedrooms, midtown, covered for the first year. Tuition at any college program you choose. Full ride, all fees, books, everything. And internships at Aldrich Capital. Paid positions, actual work. Not keeping a seat warm. Silence. Damon shook his head. "We can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because that's charity, and we don't." "I know you don't," Howard said, not cutting him off, meeting him, "which is exactly why I want to tell you something first." He set his cup down. "My son's name was Owen. He was 21 when he died. 2 years ago. A car accident on a Connecticut highway on a Sunday afternoon in October. Kind that makes no sense and never will. No matter how many times you go back over it. A pause. The kind that is not for effect. For the space the words needed to land without being cried. Owen had a belief he'd repeat whenever I pushed back on something idealistic, he said. He believed the only thing worse than failing is never giving someone the chance to try. I thought it was something you say before the world shows you had actually lost. He looked at both of them. I didn't understand what he meant until last Tuesday. Damon was looking at the table, not avoiding Howard. Looking at it the way you look at something that requires careful handling. "This isn't charity," Howard said. "I'm investing in 2 people who walked into my building, soaking wet, and handed back $14,000. They needed more than I did. That's not someone who needs rescuing. That's someone who deserves a door. You walk through it on your own 2 feet. What you build is yours." Ezra spoke quietly, the way he said things he had been holding for a while. "Why us?" Really, Howard held that question for the time it deserved. "Because you remind me of him," he said. "And because I think he would have liked you very much." The city glowed behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. 62 floors of Manhattan, all of it lit and running, and entirely indifferent to the 3 people sitting at a dinner table above it. And 4 miles south, invisible from here, a tarp and a plywood shelf and a photograph of a woman in a red coat, laughing at something off to the left of the frame. Damon looked at Ezra. Ezra looked back. One small nod, the left shoulder dip, the language that predated language between. Them okay, Damon said, but we're paying you back Howard extended his hand. Damon took it. I'm counting on it, Howard said. The apartment was on the 23rd floor of a building in Midtown. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with working appliances, a window in the living room that faced east and filled with light on clear mornings. They moved in on a Saturday, which meant they carried 2 bags between them, walked through the door, and stood in the center of a furnished room without speaking. Then Ezra crossed to the window. You know what this is, he said. What? A room with a door that locks from the inside. Damon stood next to him. They looked out at the city together, at the thing they had not had for 8 months and however many days. Damon said, That's exactly what it is. Columbia was a different kind of hard, not the hard of 8 months outside. That hard had been visible, named. You could point to it. This was the hard of walking through a dining hall knowing that certain people were running calculations about why you were there, what door you'd come through, whether the key had been yours. Most people said nothing. They operated in the register of the carefully neutral, the specifically unasking, which was its own kind of statement, one that required no words and left no evidence and still landed with the precision of something said directly. Damon was in business management, Ezra in computer science. Both of them, in the language of academic records, performing extremely well. What the Rex did not capture was the specific weight of being in a room that had not been designed with you in mind, and having to decide every day whether to let that weight change the way you moved through it. Most days he decided not to let it. And then there was Beckett Hale. Beckett Hale was in Damon's economics discussion section. He had the jaw of someone designed by consensus, and the ease of someone who had moved through a world arranged around his comfort for so long that the arrangement had become invisible to him. He was not, on the evidence, a cruel person. He was something more ordinary, and in some ways more difficult. A person who had never been required to examine what he was standing on. In the 4th week, in a discussion on economic mobility, Beck leaned back in his chair with the particular ease of someone who had never considered whether he had the right to the space he occupied, and said, I think it's worth asking, as a thought exercise, whether some outcomes in this classroom reflect merit or reflect what I'd call circumstantial advantage. I being in the right place, having the right story, at the right time. He did not look at Damon. He didn't need to. The room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone understood and no one will address. The professor looked at her notes. Damon's hands were flat on the desk, both of them, pressing down with enough force that the pressure traveled up his forearms and into his shoulders and settled behind his jaw. He looked at the window, at the gray November sky. He held it together for the rest of the class. That night, Damon moved around his bedroom with quiet efficiency, pulled his duffel from the closet, folded his clothes the way Loretta had shown him, flat, edges aligned, nothing wasted, stacked them in the bag, zipped it, set it by the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the city. He did not have a specific destination. He just had the old feeling, the one from before, that said when a place decides it doesn't want you, the reasonable response is to go. Because staying where you are not wanted takes something out of you, and the thing it takes does not come back easily. And he needed what remained of it for things that mattered, more than proving a point to or a room that wasn't paying attention. He sat there for a long time. The door opened. Ezra. He took in the scene in the way Ezra processed most things, completely and without narration, saw the bag by the door, saw Damon on the edge of the bed, said nothing immediately. He crossed the room, sat down on the floor in front of the bed, cross-legged on the carpet. In the posture he defaulted to under the bridge, when something needed working through. Not the 23rd floor, not Midtown Manhattan, a bridge. That posture, that presence. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the notebook, opened it to the first page. Loretta's handwriting, narrow, forward-leaning, fading blue ink. Take care of each other. That's all I ask. And below it, in darker ink added later, Ezra's handwriting. Don't let someone else's ceiling become your floor. Damon looked at the page. His jaw set. His eyes burned at the rims. He did not cry. He sat with it, the full weight of both lines. His mother's words and his brother's words on the same page, saying the same thing from different direction, written at different times for the same reason. Then slowly he reached out, took the notebook from Ezra, held it for one moment, closed it, handed it back, stood up. walked to the door, picked up the bag, and unzipped it. He did not sleep well that night, but he put his clothes back in the dresser, and he stayed. Which was not resolution, was not the end of the thing that had made him pack, was just staying, which he was beginning to understand was its own specific kind of work. Not the hardest work they had ever done. The bridge had been harder in ways that were nameable, but the work of remaining in a room where someone had questioned your right to be there, and doing what you came to do, and not letting it small, that was work of a different order. The kind that required something he was still learning how to preserve. 3 days later, Vera called Howard. She told him about the bag. Plainly, without softening, because that was what she was there for. Not to protect him from information, but to give it to him accurately. Howard stood at his office window for a time after she stopped talking. That evening he drove himself to the apartment. Stopped at the dlay on the corner, the one with the handwritten menu and the owner, who knew his order, and bought 2 roast beef michwinches on sourdough. Knocked on the door at 9:43 without calling ahead. Damon opened it, looked at Howard, then at the bag from the deli. Vera told you. Yes, I'm fine. You packed a bag. I unpacked it. I know. Howard walked into the kitchen, unwrapped the sandwiches, set them on the counter. Ezra appeared in the doorway, looked at Howard, looked at the sandwiches, made no comment of any kind, and returned to his laptop in the other room. Howard sat across from Damon at the kitchen counter. After Owen died, he said, I sat in my penthouse for 9 days without leaving, didn't eat properly, didn't sleep in any real sense, stopped answering calls. Vera used her spare key on day 10. He looked at Damon, not past him, at him. Running feels like the right move when a room decides you don't belong in it. It isn't. It's the move that costs you the most, because it confirms something that isn't true. Someone was looking at the sandwich, not eating it. The people who talk, Howard said. Classrooms, in hallways, wherever, they don't know you. They haven't walked $14,000 back across Brooklyn because it wasn't theirs. What they say costs them nothing, which is precisely what it's worth. He picked up his own sandwich. Are not my project. You are not a cause I've adopted. You are not Owen. He said it, plainly without drama. The way he things he had thought through completely. You are Damon, and that is sufficient. Just that, as it stands, is enough. The kitchen held that. From the other room, the steady sound of Ezra's keyboard. A person building something on a quiet weeknight evening, because building was the only work that gave back in equal measure to what it asked. Damon reached out and pulled the sandwich toward him, and they sat together at the kitchen counter, eating, not talking much. The city continuing outside the window the way it always did, without pausing, without accommodating itself to the needs of any individual person passing through it. Without asking. But inside the kitchen, something smaller than the city, and more durable than most of what the city contained. Something that had started in a lobby 6 weeks earlier, when 2 wet young men set a wallet on a desk and said, we found this, and had been growing since in the particular way of things that don't announce themselves, quietly, in the direction of something that would take time to name, but was already real, already there, already, without either of them having chosen a word for it yet, beginning to resemble the shape of a family. Time moves differently when you finally have somewhere to sleep. Damon hadn't anticipated that. I'd expected the practical improvements. Warmth, a door, food that didn't depend on what someone else was discarding. What he hadn't prepared for was the way time itself changed texture. How nights became actual nights instead of dark hours to outlast. How mornings became something you could plan inside. 15 months passed. Ezra's first year of computer science at Columbia produced a GPA of 3.9, which looks simple written down. It doesn't show the professor who pulled him aside in week 3 and said, carefully, I've been teaching this course for 16 years, and I'm not sure I've seen someone move through material at this speed. Where did you study before? Ezra said, the Brooklyn Public Library. Second row right side. The computer with the wobbly mouse. The professor blinked, then said, well, keep going. The budgeting application, built on library computers during 8 months under the bridge, caught the attention of someone Aldrich Capital's technology division. The director brought it to Howard, who walked down one floor to where Ezra was working. Did you know your application was being discussed in our technology meetings? No. We want to integrate it across 3 departments. Okay, Ezra said. Howard looked at him. That's your response? I am excited. This is what I look like when I'm excited. Howard made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but what a laugh sounds like when it has been out of practice for 2 years. Oh, fix whatever needs fixing, he said. Already fixing, Ezra said, and turned back to his screen. The integration went clean. When a bug appeared in week 4, Ezra found it and closed it in 4 hours. The technology director sent Howard a note. I don't know where you found this person, but please keep him. Howard printed it, put it in a folder in his bottom drawer, said nothing to Ezra. Folder was getting thick. Damon's 15 months looked different. The GPA was 3.7, earned while doing everything else. The fundraiser in March, a Thursday evening at a community space in the South Bronx, organized through his own phone calls and his own presence at community board meetings. He called it simply a night for youth housing. $91,000. One evening, he stood at the podium and said, "Thank you. Every dollar of this goes directly to a bed for someone who needs one tonight," and sat down. Bet Owusu was in the front row, chin up. When Damon found her afterward, he leaned close and said quietly, I brought the good muffins, Bet. The ones from Tribeca. She looked at him. Not as good as mine. He laughed. Real. Probably not. Definitely not, she said. Howard sold the penthouse in April. Not because the market was right. Because he woke one morning and understood, clearly and without drama, that he did not want to live there anymore. He bought a brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn. 4 floors. An overgrown garden. 7 blocks from the overpass on Tillery Street. He did not explain to anyone why he chose that neighborhood. Vera knew. She always knew. She helped with the move and said nothing about it, which was its own acknowledgement. On the first morning in the brownstone, he made his own coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the overgrown garden, and felt something he had not felt in 2 years. Something so ordinary it was almost startling. He felt at home. The congressional testimony came in September. Howard set aside his prepared remarks and talked about a 14-month wait list, a follow-up call scheduled and never made. A young man who couldn't submit a college applications because the fee was $45. $45, he said into the microphone. $45 stood between a 19-year-old with a genuine gift and a college application. In a country where I have paid $14,000 for a piece of art I have never once looked at twice. A congresswoman in the second row removed her glasses. The system did not fail these young men through cruelty. It failed them through scheduling, through indifference. That is harder to fix than cruelty. Cruelty has a face. Indifference is a process. He stood, straightened his jacket, walked out. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 15 months after the wallet. Howard had chosen the date deliberately. He had not told anyone that. Vera called Damon at 8:45. Mr. Aldrich needs you and Ezra at a meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll send the address. What kind of meeting? The kind you should dress for. Vera, what's happening? A pause longer than necessary. Just come, she said, and ended the call. Ezra looked up the address. They were in the Washington Heights apartment they'd rented 6 months earlier. 2 bedrooms, a dripping faucet, a radiator that clanked on cold nights. They loved it without qualification. Ezra looked at his phone, then at Damon. It's a courthouse. The word sat between them in the kitchen. Did we do something? I don't know. Are we in some kind of I don't? No. Ezra set his phone down. We find out tomorrow. Damon went to bed, did not sleep. They wore their best. Damon, the navy suit, the first he'd bought with his own money 6 weeks into Aldrich Capital. Ezra, dark gray blazer, the notebook in his inside breast pocket. He touched it through the fabric in the elevator. Once, like checking for something essential. The room was small, oak-paneled, an American flag in the corner. Wooden chairs that had held many significant moments without becoming remarkable for any of them. Vera in the second row, a deep green dress, eyes red with the effort of not crying. Beto Owusu in the third row, good coat, chin up. Nathaniel Cross at the end of the row, the occasion suit worn again, and one more person. A woman sitting quietly at the far end of the second row, watching them come in with an expression of recognition. Ayman had seen her before once, at 2:17 in the morning, in a hospital corridor on the 4th floor of Kings County. The nurse who had come to find them. He stopped walking for 1 step, because her being here meant Howard had sought her out specifically. Had brought her into this room as part of something constructed carefully over months. which meant this had been built deliberately. In silence, Howard stood at the front, charcoal suit, tie the color of deep water, hands clasped. He looked, there was no more precise word, nervous. Howard Aldrich, who had faced boardrooms and congressional hearings in the worst moment of his life without letting anyone see what it cost him. Nervous. Judge Miriam Okafor entered, silver locks, reading glasses on a chain, the bearing of someone who understood that the weight of a moment is honored by being fully present in it. She opened her folder. Case 2026-D07813. In the matter of the petition for adult adoption filed by Howard James Aldrich. The air left Damon's lungs, not a gasp, just gone. Beside him, Ezra went completely still. Howard stepped forward, looked at the judge, then turned and looked directly at them. What crossed his face was something Damon would spend a long time trying to name. Something present underneath every dinner and sandwich, and late evening, underneath all of it, waiting. It came forward now, Howard said. His voice was level, but underneath it something moved. I would like to formally adopt Damon and Ezra Carter as my son. 7 words. Not an investment, not a door, not a project or a replacement for grief. A family chosen deliberately by a man who had spent 2 years learning that what he had lost could not be recovered, and that what remained of his life required a decision. This was what he had decided. 7 months of preparation done silence, background checks, home assessments. Letters from Vera, Bet, Nathaniel, and the nurse at the end of the second row, who had written 3 pages about 2 young men she had met at 2:17 in the morning. Judge Okafor reviewed the file, then looked up. Mr. Carter, she said, looking at Ezra. Do you consent to this adoption? Ezra opened his mouth. Nothing came. He pressed his lips together. His chin moved. Then a sound escaped. Not a word, and not quite a sob. Something from a place sealed for a year and 8 months since he stood up from a hospital floor and straightened his jacket and walked out into the night. The first time he had cried in front of other people since the night Loretta died. Vera pressed a tissue to her eye once. Bet looked briefly at the ceiling. Nathaniel sat with his eyes closed. The nurse had both hands pressed together in her lap. Yes, Ezra said. The word came out worn, as though it had traveled a long way. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Carter. The judge looked at Damon. Do you consent? Damon stood up. Not a decision, his body simply stood. The way it responds when something requires your full height, everything you have. He looked at Howard, the man who had driven alone to Brooklyn and cried in his car for 2 young men he barely knew, who had showed up at 9:43 with sandwiches and said, You are not my project, you are not Owen, you are Damon, and that is enough. Said it the way you state a fact about the universe. Who had built this room in these 7 months in complete silence, because he understood that asking permission too early was asking before it could be understood. 2 words. Thank you, Dad. Howard Aldrich's face did the thing it had not done in 2 years. In front of anyone. The surface held in place through work and forward motion, and days that didn't stop just because you needed them to. It came undone, not violently. The way a dam gives when pressure exceeds what the structure was built to hold. Quietly first, then completely. He crossed the room in 3 steps. His arms went around Damon. Damon held on, with the grip of someone handed something they had stopped believing they would ever have again. Ezra stood up, joined them. 3 men in the middle of a small oak-paneled room, holding each other with the grip of people who understand that some things, once found, you do not let go of. Judge Okafor waited. Then lifted Damon and Ezra Aldrich Carter. Granted. Official. Permanent. The gavel came down, bent. Betsa started before anyone else. Both hands. Full. Not looking around to check if it was appropriate. You see the moment. You respond to it. Nathaniel joined. Then the nurse. Then Vera. And when Vera clapped it, carried 15 years of watching a man carry something alone and finally, in this room, put it down. 3 years is enough time for things to become themselves. Ezra Aldrich Carter was 23 and sitting in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building. He had helped design from a functionality standpoint the Civic Technology Division of Aldrich Capital, which had not existed before Ezra slid a 2-page proposal under Howard's office door on a Saturday morning because the idea arrived at midnight, and waiting felt unreasonable. Howard called at 8 the following morning. When do you want to start? I already started last night. A pause. Of course you did. 9 people. 1 mission. Free digital tools for housing assistance, food programs, emergency shelters. The budgeting application built on library computers now reached 47,000 people across 4 states. A venture capital firm sent an acquisition offer, $3 million. Ezra replied by email. These tools exist because people who cannot afford alternatives need them. Selling them requires trusting your commitment to that mission more than we trust our own. We'll pass. He did not reply to the follow-up. The notebook stayed on his desk, left side always. Water stains, bent corners, archival tape on the spine. Nathaniel visited monthly. Coffee. Arguments about the Oxford comma. Unresolved. Permanent. Damon Aldrich Carter was 23 and running the Aldrich Youth Housing Foundation. $14 million budget. 287 young people housed in year 1. Not numbers. Names. Files he read fully because the summary didn't tell you about the follow-up call never made or the $45 fee. The program he was most quietly proud of had no headline. Paid that fee, $45, for any young person in their system wanting to apply to college. Year 1, 1,400 applications submitted that would otherwise not have been. He knew that number by heart. Every Friday morning he went to Bet's kitchen, didn't wash dishes, but rolled up his sleeves and helped with prep. Not announced, just there. One Friday he brought Tribeca muffins, blue box tissue paper. Bet took one. Not as good as mine, he agreed, brought them the next Friday. Same verdict, same agreement. That was the ritual. That was enough. Howard Aldrich was 65 and had become, against his own expectations, a person who gardened, not skillfully. Petra, who addressed him exclusively as you with the pruning shears, had established early that several things he'd been removing were not weeds. 3 nonprofit boards now. Housing policy, foster care reform. The organization focused on follow-up calls never made and fees that closed doors. I showed up to every committee meeting, every long call where progress was measured in increments invisible for years. Because that was the work, not the speech, the showing up. Every Sunday he drove to Washington Heights with sandwiches, sat at the kitchen table with his sons, talked about the division, the foundation, Petra and the tomatoes, the film all 3 had watched separately and were now watching together because Howard had texted about it on a Thursday, unprecedented, and both had agreed immediately. Sometimes Ezra brought the notebook out, not to explain, just to have a present. Howard had learned that this was Ezra's way of including you with words, with proximity. Howard learned to ask one specific question. What's this part doing? Error handling. What happens if it fails? It doesn't. Everything. His screen. Yeah. Okay. Fair. And they would sit in the kitchen with the faucet doing outside percussion and a small percussion and something between them that had started as a dinner and a handshake and had grown over 3 years of Sunday afternoons into something with no better word than the obvious one. Family. Not the kind you are born into, the kind you choose. Deliberately, imperfectly, over time, with attention to the small things because the small things are what the large things are made of. In the home office of the Park Slope brownstone, Howard kept a small shelf. On it, in a plain glass case, Owen Aldrich wallet. Black leather, worn at the corners. The silver money clip, empty. The note still in its slot, folded on the crease that had held it for 5 years. For the man who gave me everything. Oh, beside the case, a silver frame. 3 men at a kitchen table. Howard in the middle, Damon on his left, Ezra on his right, all 3 looking left of the camera at something outside the frame. All 3 mid-law, the genuine kind that forgets the camera exists. On the wall above in small, clean letters. Sometimes the thing you lose is the map to the thing you were always meant to find. And below, in Loretta Carter's handwriting, scanned from a water-stained notebook, take care of each other. That's all I ask. On a Tuesday morning in October, Damon stood on the sidewalk outside the foundation offices. He looked south. 7 blocks south was the overpass, the underpass, the place where for 8 months cardboard had been his bed and a found tarp his roof and his mother's nil photographs had stood on a plywood shelf, and he and his brother had built a system from when everything else was taken. He didn't go down there, didn't need to, but he looked. The way you look at a place that held an earlier version of you. Not with grief, not with nostalgia, with the steady regard of someone who knows that where you came from is part of what you are made of, not something to hide or perform differently in different rooms. Just true. The way the bridge was just south, the way the city held all of it simultaneously without contradiction. The door behind him opened, A Daisy, one of his staff, bringing in a girl, 17, a gray hoodie through sorts and seasons than designed for, sneakers holding on. Eyes doing what eyes learn to do when a person has spent significant time needing to assess a room before committing to entering it. Alert, careful. Still coming through the door. The girl looked up, saw Damon. He met her eye, just long satan, and nodded once, small. The nod that said, "You made it here." That was the part that was yours to do alone. The rest we figure out together. Then he turned, went inside, no ceremony. A man walking back through a door he had helped build, in a city that had once run out of room for him, going back to the work, as the work was not finished. Because that was the thing about follow-up calls. If you wanted them made, you had to become the person who made them. He was. He did. Every single day. The wallet stayed in its case. The note stayed in its slot. The crease held. The leather continued, wearing softly at corners in the way of things handled with care by people who understood their value. And on Sunday evenings, a man drove up from Brooklyn to Washington Heights with sandwiches in a paper bag, sat at a kitchen table with his sons, asked about error handling, listened to the answer. The faucet dripped. The city ran, and it was enough. It was, without argument, everything.